single photograph shows Nazi soldiers caught on camera with a prisoner playing piano. Experts can't believe it.
When I first saw the photographs, I got goosebumps.
78 years later, the image, unearthed from a forgotten archive, appears to capture something impossible. For decades, no one knew who the man was or why the moment was recorded at all. Then a historian began digging, and what she uncovered finally explained the photograph that stunned the world. Silesia, winter of 1944. A courtyard behind a commandeered manor stood silent except for the faint rattle of an out-of-tune piano. Its keys were yellowed, the lid splintered, and a faded red flag with a black swastika draped over its top. 8 soldiers stood in a semicircle, their faces unreadable. A prisoner sat at the piano, thin to the point of collapse, his bones sharp against the fabric of his torn uniform. He hesitated, his fingers hovering just above the keys. "Play," one officer ordered. The man's hands trembled. The first note rang out sharp and wrong. The man bristled, sensing the soldiers shifting beside him. If he'd messed up, there would be a punishment, he was sure. The same officer who had ordered him to play glared, then barked, "I said play. You will play." Music had left long ago. Being a piano player felt like a lifetime ago, but his fingers found the keys again. What followed was a hesitant string of chords that faltered, then steadied. The soldiers listened. One leaned against the wall, arms folded. Another smirked faintly. One looked away, his jaw set, eyes fixed on the ground. The air was cold enough to sting, and the piano's wooden frame crackled as it shifted in the wind. A camera clicked. The man didn't look up. He didn't dare. He knew the rules. He'd been told to play, which meant his eyes shouldn't leave the piano. Ever. His fingers were moving across the keys more easily now, though each movement was still physically and emotionally painful. The piece ended abruptly when a string snapped, the sound slicing through the courtyard like glass. No one spoke. The officer turned away. That was the moment, frozen forever. The prisoner at the piano, the soldiers around him, a single captured instant of obedience and control. The photograph vanished into an archive and was never seen again. 78 years later, the image resurfaced. Dr. Karina Becker, a German historian specializing in wartime culture, received a high-resolution scan of the photo from a private collector in Prague. The man claimed it was part of a roll of negatives found in an old Wehrmacht storage box sold at auction. But the photo wasn't meant to be seen. Not by the public, not by history, and certainly not for what it captured. At first glance, it looked staged. The composition was almost perfect, but something about the expressions didn't fit. The soldiers weren't triumphant or mocking. They looked detached, uncertain. The expressions made no sense. Experts couldn't believe it. The photograph broke every known pattern of Nazi photographic propaganda, which usually depicted soldiers as noble or victorious. This image was something else entirely. Karina had spent her career studying the ways culture was used during the war, and how music, art, and theater had been twisted to serve ideology. She knew this photograph meant something. But what exactly? Karina began with the smallest details: the insignia, buttons, and belt buckles. The soldiers' uniforms showed they belonged to an administrative unit of the Waffen-SS, not frontline troops. One officer wore a sleeve patch unique to Silesia, a region now part of Poland. Jakob Reiner, an archivist who often assisted her, joined the research. Together they compared the photo's architecture to old estate records within days. They matched it to a manor near Żagań, used during 1944 as an officer's rest post. In military documents, Karina found repeated references to the property: Estate 37, requisitioned facilities, music room intact. One inventory note stood out: piano seized from local school Żagań, January 1944. That detailed the piano was the connection she needed. For the Nazis, the piano represented German cultural dominance, centuries of Bach, Beethoven, and Wagner. Forcing a prisoner to play it would have been a symbolic act, proof that even art had to serve the Reich. But who was the man behind the keys? That felt like the most important part to Karina. He was the one who needed his story to be discovered. Transport records from nearby holding sites listed hundreds of names, but one leapt out at Karina: Samuel Adler, age 36, Polish-Jewish pianist and composer. Something told her this was the man she was searching for. It wasn't unusual to find Jewish musicians in transport logs, but in this particular record, Samuel was the only one listed as a pianist and composer. There was little doubt that he was the man in the photo. Before the war, Adler had been a rising name in Warsaw's concert halls, known for his performances of Mendelssohn and Mahler, both Jewish composers banned under Nazi rule. He'd packed out the halls and was well on his way to being one of Poland's brightest stars, until the Nazis invaded. He'd been arrested in 1942 for cultural sabotage, a charge used for artists who refused to conform. Samuel understood the importance of the piano in Jewish culture too, and had refused to bend to the Nazis' requirements. He understood what the piano meant in Jewish culture: prayer through melody, memory through rhythm. He'd refused to replace that with their music, their message. For that, he'd been sent east, and everything that followed had reduced him to the man in the photo, trembling, starving, but somehow unbroken. In a camp ledger next to Adler's name was a short note: held for morale duties, piano. Experts couldn't believe it. The description matched the emaciated man in the photo almost exactly. It was coercion. Adler had been forced to play for his captors, performing the very music they claimed to despise. Karina felt a chill. The photo had nothing to do with victory. It was about humiliation, the perverse twisting of culture into control. The soldiers weren't smiling out of pride. They were entertained. She saw it now, the way one leaned casually against the wall, another resting his hand on the piano's edge as if claiming ownership of the music itself. The prisoner was enduring. He was just trying to stay alive. In that frozen instant, the camera had captured the Nazi regime's obsession with dominance, not just through power, but through art. To force a man to play beauty in the service of brutality. Karina exhaled slowly, her eyes tracing the faint outline of the pianist's ribs. A musician, known in concert halls before the war. And now, reduced to this, an echo of melody framed by men who saw art as theirs to dictate, not to understand. For the first time since she'd found the photograph, she was thinking like a witness. The next step was identifying the officer standing closest to the piano, the one with the iron cross pinned beneath his collar. Karina magnified the image until the letters on his tag were legible. Mertens. A search through personnel files confirmed it. Obersturmführer Heinrich Mertens, 41, formerly a music teacher from Dresden. Before joining the SS, Mertens had lectured on musical purity and the role of German composers in shaping moral strength. His post-war profile described him as cultured, articulate, and ideologically devoted. Documents from early 1944 revealed that he'd been transferred to Silesia and given charge of cultural oversight at the Jagan estate. In one internal memo, Mertens wrote, "Music remains an instrument of morale and order among men. Even the condemned must understand its authority." It was a chilling line. He believed music could be weaponized. The photograph, Karina concluded, was almost certainly taken under Mertens's direction, not for propaganda, but for documentation. Proof that culture had been conquered as completely as people. Karina spent hours studying the soldiers' expressions. Most appeared blank, performing duty without emotion. But one face caught her attention. His head was slightly bowed, his mouth drawn tight. He looked uneasy. It wasn't an expression you saw often from Nazi officers. Jakob, examining personnel rosters, identified him as Corporal Otto Böhme, a clerk assigned to the same unit. His post-war disciplinary record contained a single curious note: insubordination during morale event, reprimanded by Mertens. That date matched the likely timing of the photograph. Perhaps Böhme had protested the event, or simply turned away. Karina couldn't know for sure, but it hinted at something rare, a flicker of discomfort within an otherwise obedient unit. Out of 8 soldiers, 1 had looked away. It didn't redeem the scene, but it made it human. The unease visible in the photo now made sense, not remorse, not guilt, but the simple instinctive recoil from something that felt wrong, even to those conditioned not to see it. The biggest mystery left was who took the picture. Karina cross-referenced the names listed at the estate. One matched: Friedrich Kuhn, a Wehrmacht clerk assigned to handle supplies and logistics. Kuhn wasn't SS, just an army administrator temporarily attached to the post. He handled inventories, correspondence, and photography. That set him apart from the Nazi officers. By 1944, men like Kuhn were everywhere, not ideologues, just cogs in a machine that had begun to crack from within. The front was collapsing, fuel was scarce, and whispers of the Reich's inevitable defeat had started to circulate even among those who still wore the uniform. Many of the older soldiers avoided talking politics altogether, their patriotism eroded by years of hunger, fear, and loss. Kuhn's work kept him close to officers but far from the front. He saw things, the quiet punishments, the burnings, the disappearances, and like many in the regular army, he had learned to say nothing, but silence didn't mean belief. There was a weariness now, a hollow obedience that came from doing what was ordered long after conviction had died. Karina located his interrogation file from 1945, written by Allied intelligence in Austria. Kuhn had been captured and executed for defeatist behavior and dissemination of defeatist material. Inside his file was a short statement written in his own hand. "I took photographs as ordered. Some I kept, because truth should survive, even if we don't." Experts couldn't believe it. It explained everything. Kuhn had been the photographer, and he'd secretly preserved the negatives, perhaps intending for them to be found one day. The image of the prisoner at the piano wasn't propaganda at all. It was evidence, not of loyalty, but of fracture. Proof that even inside the machinery of obedience, one man had paused long enough to see what was really happening, and left behind a record no one was meant to see. Karina's final task was to uncover what became of the pianist. Records showed Adler was listed as deceased just 1 week after the photograph was taken. Cause of death: illness. But the detail didn't end there. In post-war testimony, a local resident named Elizabeth Muller recalled hearing music coming from the estate courtyard late one evening around that time. She described it as slow and mournful, like a prayer. The melody she hummed decades later was Kol Nidre, a traditional Jewish tune used during Yom Kippur, a melody Adler was known for performing before the war. Karina cross-checked concert programs from Warsaw in 1937. There it was, Samuel Adler, Kol Nidre Variations. The realization was staggering. If Muller's memory was correct, Adler had defied his captors one last time. They had ordered him to play German music instead. He had played his own, disguised within the chords of Beethoven. The soldiers probably never noticed, but one of them, perhaps Böhme, might have felt something shift. The unease in the photograph now had context. That final act of rebellion, small as it was, gave the image a new meaning. Yes, it was a record of dominance, but more importantly, it was also a moment of resistance preserved in plain sight. Karina gathered every file, every document, and every name. After months of work, the full story stood clear. She'd given Samuel Adler and perhaps even Friedrich Kuhn the respect and dignity they deserved. It was so simple to look at a photo and assume you knew the story behind it, but the experts had been truly shocked by the human stories they'd uncovered in one moment of Nazi soldiers being caught on camera. When Karina presented her findings to a panel of historians, the room fell silent. The photo that had baffled experts for years finally had a story. A single, stark image had connected 4 lives: a pianist forced to play, a commander demanding control, a soldier who looked away, and a photographer who quietly recorded it all. For 78 years, the photograph had been passed from hand to hand, stripped of its meaning. Now, its context was finally restored. Karina cataloged the image for the National Archive under a simple heading: Samuel Adler, Jagan, 1944, Cultural Requisition Photograph. She included Kuhn's statement and the relevant personnel files. Her report was finished. Samuel Adler's story was complete, but it was one she would never forget. Was the image of Nazi soldiers and the prisoner playing piano an act of quiet defiance, or proof that even the cruelest moments in history can hide traces of conscience? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next video.